Let's go ahead and get started, everyone. I'm Emily Wright. I'm the Director of Planning and Sustainability for the City of Franklin. I'd like to welcome you all. And I know our City Administrator has joined us, Eric Stuckey, and I'm going to turn it over to him just to make a few remarks before we get started with our presentation.
Thanks, Emily. And I just want to say a quick word of welcome and a word of thanks for taking time to be a part of this. And also a thank you and recognition of the work our planning staff and other members of our city team have put in to prepare information for you tonight. Really, this is the very beginning of a process, an important process, and we want to engage our community in this discussion. This is a look at our growth plan as a county and updating that. It's been over 20 years. It's time to look at it. A lot has changed, and we want to make sure we're looking at it with the right perspective, and your input is important in everything we do, but especially something like this. So take your time tonight to get oriented to the process. We're all kind of starting off with this. This is sort of a preliminary process leading into a more formal process that'll kick in sometime next year. But again, we thank you for being part of it and thank our team for the work they put in and will continue to put in as we work through this journey and this process together as a community. So I'll hand it back over to Emily. And again, thank you for being with us.
Great. Well, thank you, Eric. We do have several staff members that have joined us as well, and we'll be trying to make sure that you get all your questions answered before the end of the night. And we also have a few elected officials I know that are planning to join us, and I haven't run through the list of participants, but we welcome you all as well, and as well as the public. We're happy to have you here. So just a couple of things I want to run through. If you could remain on mute during the presentation, we will take all comments, questions, and any discussion at the end of the presentation. Since this is really a kickoff meeting, we want to provide you some information up front and then just kind of pick up with any questions you may have at that point at the end. So on that note, the chat feature is disabled until we get to the end of the presentation, just so it's not too distracting during the short presentation we have. But we'll enable that as soon as we get to the last slide. I also wanted to mention that we want to respect everyone's time tonight, and we're happy to be here and be a resource for everyone. We do have this brief presentation at the end. We'll take all those questions and comments, but if we are still running into some of those around 7:30, we're going to wrap up at 7:30 to be respectful of everyone's time, and we'll provide you, either way, you'll be provided with staff contact information, and you may reach out to us by phone, email, you can set up a meeting with us, and we'll be happy to discuss this topic further with you at any point. So on that note, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into the presentation. As we've mentioned, this is regarding the Williamson County Growth Plan update. And specifically, this is for the City of Franklin. We're kind of kicking off our part, looking at our urban growth boundary. Andrew, if you could go to the next slide. I don't think I'm able to switch the slides. So a little bit about the growth plan. It's a state mandated county-wide plan, and it establishes urban growth boundaries around each municipality in the county. So that's inclusive of Brentwood, Spring Hill, Thompson Station, Nolensville, and Fairview, and Franklin, of course. There's also within that plan, planned growth areas that remain in the county that are outside of the urban growth boundaries, and rural areas within the county. So those are the three components that really make up the county mandated growth plan. It was adopted in 2001, and as Eric says, we have not updated it since that time. So it's a really good opportunity for us to go back and look at what's changed since that point in time and what makes sense today. So Tennessee Code Annotated, our state law, prescribes these procedures for amending the growth plan. And that really starts with the coordinating committee. Go ahead, Andrew. This is a graphic of our existing county growth plan. Our mapping skills weren't quite what they are today, so just apologize for that. But you can see each of the municipalities within the county. Franklin is in the center there in the orange. And the darker color represents the entirety of each municipality's urban growth boundary. And the lighter shaded color within it represented the city limits at the time in 2001 when this plan was adopted. You can also see a few notations where you see PGA 1, 2, 3, 4. Those were planned growth areas identified by the county within the county's remaining area at the time this plan was adopted. You'll go to the next slide, Andrew. So this is the city of Franklin's urban growth boundary in blue. And you can see our city limits today in yellow. So over the last 5 years, especially, there was a change to state law in 2015 regarding annexation. And so you'll see a few indicators of that on this map in the yellow. There are a couple down Lewisburg Pike, some satellite annexations that have happened. There's also some annexation down in the southeast area along I-65 that are outside of the blue urban growth boundary. Well, some of the state law changes in 2015 allowed these to happen because annexation became property owner driven, which means that if a property owner wants to request annexation of their property into the city limits, they may move forward with that request to be considered by the legislative body, in our case, the Franklin Board of Mayor and Aldermen. But the city is not permitted to go out and annex property without that property owner's consent. So it definitely affects how we grow today because of these changes. It doesn't allow us to plan in the same way we previously did. Some of the things that happened down in the southeast area, how that annexation came to be was the property owners wanted to be in the city of Franklin, but they weren't in the urban growth boundary. State law does allow for a referendum to occur where the property owners can be placed, there can be a referendum placed on the ballot, and property owners can vote to have their properties annexed into the city of Franklin. And that's what happened there, where there are properties outside the urban growth boundary. These are just a few factors that really encouraged us to want to look back at our urban growth boundary and really take into consideration some things that have changed since 2001 when this growth plan was originally adopted. These are different factors than what were taking place back in 2001. So as we go through this process, I just wanted everyone to be aware of some of those changes. The process for amending the growth plan in simple terms is any municipality that wants to propose an amendment to the UGB has to undertake certain technical studies and has some public outreach obligations. It goes the same way for the county if they wish to amend their planned growth areas or rural areas. And after, those are the first things that happen as part of this process. And after those tasks are completed, a letter is then sent to the county mayor to convene the coordinating committee. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But ultimately, the process concludes with approval by legislative bodies. So all the municipalities, legislative bodies must approve it, and the county commission must approve it as well. And then the growth plan is then sent to the State Local Government Planning Advisory Committee, which we call the LGPAC, and then they would consider it and approve it before it is official. So a little bit about the coordinating committee. It's formed to review and consider the proposed amendments, and it holds at least 2 public hearings prior to finalizing its recommendation. The membership is specified in our state law and TCA, and the membership includes representatives from the county, each municipality, Middle Tennessee Electric, the Soil Conservation District, the largest utility provider in the county, which in this case is the City of Franklin Water District, the Chamber of Commerce, and Williamson County Schools. Once the coordinating committee convenes, they have 6 months to prepare and present a full county growth plan to the municipalities and the county's legislative bodies for ratification. So a little bit about what goes into the technical studies and what goes into the public outreach obligations. This is pulled from Tennessee Code Annotated. So prior to proposing the amendments to the coordinating committee, each municipality or the county need to conduct at least 2 public hearings of their own. Each jurisdiction will also develop and report population growth projections. And one of the biggest pieces of information is to calculate the current cost and projected cost of core infrastructure services and public facilities, that would be necessary to facilitate development, both within the current, any redevelopment within the current city limits, as well as expansion into its urban growth boundary. It would need to report on the need for additional land that is suitable for high density industrial, commercial, or any residential development, and taking into account, again, what's already in the city limits, as well as where the UGB is proposed. And then one of the big portions of this as well is to really identify environmentally sensitive lands, inclusive of agricultural land, forest, recreational areas, areas of wildlife management that are in the territory that would be considered for within the UGB, and making sure that we really analyze the long-term effect of urban expansion into those areas. So these are from TCA, some kind of guiding principles. You could say that TCA identifies for cities of what they expect the urban growth boundary of each municipality to kind of be built upon. It should identify territory that is reasonably compact yet sufficiently large enough to accommodate any non-residential or residential growth that's projected in the next 20 years. That 20-year timeframe is really crucial. That's something, kind of the planning horizon, which we all work towards within this plan. And that's not just the city of Franklin, that's the counties and the other the county and the other municipalities as well. We should also identify territory that is contiguous to the existing boundaries of our municipality. That's to really ensure that we have orderly and efficient growth. And doing that under the current annexation law is a challenge. So this is a really important part. We need to figure out how we can continue to be orderly and efficient in our growth, but at the same time adhere to that annexation law. Go back real quick, Andrew. We also must kind of use this reasonable and prudent person kind of thought in the back of our head. What would that person think of as the likely site of that growth, of the commercial growth, of the residential growth over the next 20 years, and base that from historical experience, economic trends, and the growth patterns we've seen, as well as actual topographic characteristics, planning studies that have been done in the past about suitability of land, and using all of those planning efforts to help steer what is reasonable. And then we must identify territory where the municipality is most efficiently and effectively able to provide urban services. That's really essential during this process. And then, as I mentioned before, really looking at that impact to those environmentally sensitive areas as well. Okay, Andrew. So what does all this mean for Franklin? Well, the city has formed an internal working group of departmental staff representatives from our water and sewer department, engineering department, parks, planning, fire, and administration. And we're undergoing a preliminary technical review of all 10 of our drainage basins or sewer basins within the urban growth boundary to really analyze services and the cost of providing that infrastructure and public facilities to that would be necessary to facilitate growth into the urban growth boundary. And we're analyzing that to see how those costs do kind of come out and what makes sense from a growth standpoint. And this group will create some initial draft reports that has that information in it for the public to view and for our Board of Mayor and Aldermen and Planning Commission to review, and as well as to pass on to the coordinating committee once they convene. We have continued community outreach through early fall. So our next public meeting date is tentatively scheduled for Tuesday, September 21st here at City Hall. Would be an in-person meeting, and it would be a meeting where we would plan to look at some proposed boundaries for the urban growth boundary of Franklin. There are public hearings anticipated for early 2022. And at the end of this process, it could result in some potential changes to the urban growth boundary that respond to what we hear from the public, what we find out through analyzing infrastructure investments, both planned and completed, as we analyze growth patterns and the cost to serve those areas. Go ahead, Andrew. So that kind of summarizes what the growth planning process is, what some of the basis for it is, and what's required of the municipalities and the county. But one thing we wanted to do before we jump into questions is talk a little bit about what we've done as a city in terms of planning over the last 5 years. So this is a lot of this information that we're looking at during a technical review is not necessarily new to us. Some things have changed over the last 5 years since we've looked at this, but we do have a couple of documents that really provide a good foundation for how the city wants to grow over time that's based in community outreach, kind of rooting back to 2015 and again through 2017, 2018. And we look forward to gaining more public input through this process as well. So I'm going to turn it over to our long-range planning supervisor, Andrew Orr, and he's going to go through some of these documents, and then we'll circle back for questions and discussion at the end.
Thank you, Emily. You went through the part that was text heavy, so I'm going to share some maps and graphics. We've got 7 or 8 slides to go, and then we'll take some questions and comments, and we're looking forward to hearing from you guys. Like Emily said, we're not starting from scratch. We've done a lot of preparation work over the last couple of years, starting with the Envision Franklin update. And part of that was a suitability analysis, which led to the creation of design concepts, which are like the future land use designations for property within our urban growth boundary. And then in 2018, due to a surge of annexation requests, we took a step back and did a study and tried to identify areas where we could support more annexation in areas where maybe it wasn't appropriate at that time. And then we'll get into some guiding principles. So the suitability analysis came about in the early phases of the Envision Franklin update. We had a quote planning expert come to Franklin to talk about some things that he had done across the country. And I believe he was one of the former planning directors for Missoula, Montana. And one of the things he did there that was successful was the creation of a suitability analysis to try and drive and steer growth in their community. And that piqued the interest of our staff and our decision makers. So we included that as part of the Envision Franklin update. When you're looking at this map, the orange and red represent the least suitable. And then the dark green and light green represent the most suitable areas for development. So it's a spectrum. You're probably wondering what it's based off of. What are the factors and criteria that were used? And floodplain, floodway was weighted highest, along with steep slopes. So environmentally constrained areas were given the highest priority, excuse me, and also availability to sewer. So if an area was in the floodplain and didn't have nearby access to sewer, those are the areas that are showing up in bright red. And the way they did it was by parcel. So if a parcel had more than 50% least suitable, if a property had more than 50% floodplain, then it's going to show up probably orange or red. So looking at this, there are a couple areas along the fringe of our urban growth boundary that are red. As you travel 96 east, we call that the Mays Creek area, due to the lack of sewer and some of the floodplain constraints out there, and just the proximity from I-65 and the employment centers, because those were also some factors that were used. And in fact, for those interested, all of this is on page 137 of Envision Franklin. There's a couple pages that detail all of this. But for the point of tonight, it just shows you that along the fringes of our urban growth boundary, they're just not suitable for development at this time, mainly due to sewer not being available, because we try to serve city properties on gravity sewer. So the suitability analysis helped us create the future land uses for Franklin. We call them design concepts. The light green area is our development reserve, and you'll notice the development reserve sort of corresponds to those least suitable areas. So as you travel out Carter's Creek Pike towards Leapers Fork, that area is shown as development reserve. South along Columbia Pike, heading into Thompson Station, is shown as development reserve, and then the Mays Creek Basin. So those are the primary areas where we have that. The dark purple is regional commerce. That's our interstate corridor there. But just wanted to highlight the development reserve. And then the dark green represents conservation areas, so the floodplain and steep slopes. In 2018, our staff worked on an annexation study. We were receiving lots of annexation inquiries from all over our urban growth boundary, and part of that was a response to the change in state law. The city used to grow in a way to where only parcels adjacent to city limits were eligible. And there may have been a few exceptions there, but so the city mainly grew like this. And then when the state law changed, any property in our urban growth boundary and even beyond was eligible to request annexation. So it really made us think about how we want to grow the city and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So we looked at our community in terms of drainage basins, because we want to serve development on gravity sewer, and that corresponds to these drainage basins, how a sewer network would lay out. So what we came up with on a high level, we came up with short, mid, and long-term areas for growth, in terms of what are these areas' capability to grow. And there are two that we identified in the short term, and the first one being West Harpeth. So the area along 96 West with West Haven, and then north where the new Mac Hatcher extension is coming through, that was identified as a short-term capability based on infrastructure, land uses, environmental features, proximity to city services, fire, road network, developable acreage, all these things. The Goose Creek area also came up in the short term due to the growth of Berry Farms and the development out of Berry Farms and the infrastructure investments that have been occurring and that are planned. So those two areas came up as short-term capability areas for growth. Mays Creek is mid, and And then the remaining are long-term. Of course, the basins that are currently in the city limits, we didn't look at those, but the long-term areas, again, sort of corresponding to our suitability analysis and the Envision Franklin design concepts. And here it kind of shows. So fortunately, we've done a lot of the legwork already to some degree in terms of areas where we feel like we can grow, areas where we could grow, but it would require a lot of investment and property owner interest. In terms of our guiding principles for the growth plan update, all the communities in Williamson County are involved. The county's involved, Thompson Station, Spring Hill, Brentwood, Franklin, Fairview. We're all looking at this in our own communities, and then we'll put all of our urban growth boundaries together on a map and create an updated one. That's the hope. Hopefully that happens. We get to that point. But all the communities kind of collectively, we want to have an open and transparent public process. We want to engage local citizens. We want to engage property owners, and we want this to be out there. We have a webpage, franklintn.gov/UGB, that will continue to update. The county has a webpage that they're updating as well. And there will be some public hearings later on, probably in early 2022. The planning horizon is also something that's been emphasized, and that's ideally up to 20 years. There are talks of looking at an area for 10 years, looking at an area for 20 years. That's generally what we're looking at. It's hard to predict these things, and a lot of it depends on property owner requests, but we're doing our best in terms of projecting when things could occur. Accommodate future growth in coordination with the municipality's vision for growth and the use of population forecasts. Efficient and fiscally sustainable delivery of municipal services, infrastructure, and public facilities. And part of the state law's purpose of including language like this is they want to make sure that cities are creating boundaries that are realistic and that make sense fiscally, being fiscally responsible. Resource protection is also a guiding principle from a county-wide perspective, and where are those areas that we want to preserve, and are they best to remain in the county, or can areas we want to preserve, can they also be in the city? So those are some of the discussions that will be had. And then also the desire to create a distinct regional form of high quality, compact, urban and suburban development surrounded by rural development. And the regional form, one example would be in Cool Springs. Sometimes people don't know where Brentwood ends and Franklin begins. And it can be a little confusing. Am I in Brentwood or Franklin? I'm in Cool Springs. So we're trying to avoid that. We want each city and municipality to kind of have a distinct form, a compact form. We do border Thompson Station to the south, so we want to be cognizant of that there is a break between Franklin and Thompson Station. And also focus on growth boundary issues and coordination, respecting each jurisdiction's local autonomy and successful traditions of local planning. And one thing that's starting to come up are interlocal agreements and what that would look like between the county government and some of the cities, or agreements made between some of the cities going forward. I think I missed a slide here, but that's okay. We'll wrap up.
No, Andrew, I think that was just a reiteration of the guiding principles, so it was hidden. So you're good.
Okay. Well, again, we have a project webpage, franklintn.gov/UGB. This presentation is already on the webpage. We'll have a link to the recording from tonight on there, and we'll do our best to keep it up to date. Some information will be shared at the August 26th Joint Conceptual Workshop. I'm not sure that we have a start time yet. It just depends on how many items, but that'll be an in-person meeting, and will probably be a relatively high-level discussion. At the September 21st community meeting, we do intend to have a draft to share, an updated urban growth boundary to get feedback on. And we've discovered that oftentimes, giving the community something to react to is a good way to garner feedback in an effective way. Of course, between now and then, if anybody would like to speak privately or have a more thorough discussion, I'm happy to make myself available. Emily probably can as well. And we'll make sure that we create some time in the coming weeks to answer your questions. So we're happy to do that. But we also want to create some open office hours after the community meeting. So we've identified some of those for the 22nd and the 24th. At City Hall from 8 to 5, we'll have staff available for folks to walk in and ask questions or make comments, provide feedback. So we wanted to make that opportunity available. And we also intend to keep the aldermen and the planning commissioners up to date. And we'll present some information on September 23rd at the Joint Conceptual Workshop. We'll plan to do that as well. And then afterwards, tentatively scheduled for October 12th, BOMA work session, presentation and discussion. And that would be to kind of recap the draft urban growth boundary and inform them of the feedback that we've received. And if there's any maybe outstanding issues for them to weigh in on. And then on October 19th, I don't know that a time has been set, but the Williamson County government, they're planning a growth plan symposium to be held. And it should be a wonderful event. They've invited 3 different jurisdictions, representatives from Wake County, North Carolina, Beaufort, South Carolina, and the greater Chattanooga area to share their experiences with some regional planning efforts. So that should be a great event. And then after that, it's all very tentative, but we know that we'll have to host 2 public hearings. That will take place early 2022. And at those public hearings, there's not a vote. They're just public hearings. They'll probably be held during a BOMA meeting and or a planning commission meeting. They'll be advertised well in advance. And we'll, once all these dates are finalized, we'll update our webpage. And then the coordinating committee will have to hold 2 public hearings. And then it will go back for approval before each legislative body prior to ratification by the LGPAC. There's another effort I would like to go ahead and make everybody aware of, and that is over the last couple of years, the city has annexed over 800 acres in the Goose Creek area outside of the urban growth boundary. And one of the key things about our urban growth boundary is we use that for planning purposes. We use it for land use planning, infrastructure planning, Connect Franklin, our major thoroughfare plan is based on it. So as we've annexed outside of our UGB, our planning documents don't really address them. So we have selected a consultant to help us facilitate updates to our plans and how we can accommodate development and answer all the questions that hopefully answer all the questions that we've struggled to answer. So that'll be happening later this fall. And we're looking forward to that initiative as well. So I think I've hit everything I wanted to hit. Emily or Eric, I'm happy to turn it back over to you guys, or we can go into questions. I will enable the chat feature so you guys can use that as well.
Yes, so we'll go ahead and open it up for any discussion or questions that anyone here on the meeting has. I would ask you, if you're going to ask your question out loud, just be respectful of others. It's hard to kind of go in an orderly fashion. You may also use the chat feature that Andrew just opened up if you'd like to put your question in there. But please go ahead.
Hey, this is Michelle Sutton. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having this meeting. First and foremost, it's extremely informative. I just wanted to ask Andrew, to your last point about the Goose Creek meetings, have those been set yet, or are those in addition to these next steps that you have listed on this slide?
Yeah, thank you for that. No, nothing's been set yet. We just agreed upon a scope of services at a staff level with the consultant, and it's in for law review, to be completely honest with you. And
Okay.
once law reviews it and is satisfied, it'll go before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to approve. And
Okay, great.
we're hoping that we can have that discussion on the September 28th BOMA work session. You know, that's what we're hoping for.
And I'll just chime
Okay,
in, Andrew, that's the scope of services and the contract with the consultant that would be going before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And then once that's approved, the process actually opens up and begins public outreach at that point.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a question. The changes that you're considering moving forward, Monica Neubauer, anyway, the changes you're considering moving forward, is it going to affect the zoning possibilities? My big passion project is we have so many apartments, and how can we affect the areas? I know there's big consideration with those areas around the interstate and places where high density zoning is appropriate. So in the reconsideration of the urban growth boundary, are they going to be considering best zoning options? Is that going to be changing as part of it? Or does all of that still going to have to go through BOMA even afterwards? How does the zoning fit in here? Thank you.
Right. So this is actually just a study of the boundary itself. We will look at potential land uses, of course, as we're going through this process, but no changes to the city's visioning documents, Envision Franklin, or the zoning ordinance would be included as part of this process. However, once this process is completed, it will necessitate that it'll require us as staff to bring back Envision Franklin for a review and major update, because we use the urban growth boundary as our basis for the planning jurisdiction. So that will be forthcoming after this process is completed.
I see Ned has his hand up. Ned, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, thanks. We actually just moved here from Memphis, where sort of the opposite is true. There's a mad dash to de-annex and get outside of the city limits whenever possible. Could you help me understand a little bit then sort of the appeal for folks looking to join Franklin? Is it access to your sewer? Is it a more prestigious address? What is driving folks wanting to be in the city limits?
I would say oftentimes it's a development pattern that is different. We have access to urban infrastructure, city sewer, which does often allow for a higher density than what can be permitted under the systems in the county or septic treatment of wastewater. That's one driver. Of course, we like to think it's our quality of life in Franklin as well. You know, we do citizen surveys, and there are a number of factors that citizens have said, you know, are reasons why they want to be in the city of Franklin. But I would say number one, if property owners are interested in coming into the city of Franklin for development purposes, it's most likely that access to urban infrastructure that can support a higher density than in the county.
Gotcha. Thank you.
This is Alderman Duffberger. I would just add to that too, that when people want to be in the city, they're, like Emily said, they also get city services. They have police and fire, solid waste. But a lot of times it decreases their homeowners insurance as well. And of course, sewer, availability to sewer and infrastructure. I just wanted to add that other caveat, because I think that's definitely part of it.
Thank you, Alderman Berger. We'll go to the chat box here for a minute. Michael asked, what service does the city of Franklin provide to the urban growth boundary areas outside of the city limits? Well, for the first part of that question, we do not provide services to properties that are not actually in the municipal boundary itself within the city limits, unless there's a private agreement for a sewer service or something like that. And that has to be specially approved by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And that's a rare case that those services are provided without annexing into the city limits. And then the rest of the question was, are these services provided at all outside of the boundary? No, not normally. They are not provided outside of our urban growth boundary. For the most part, I would say there may be some areas where we might hit up in the grassland area where there might be some sewer service through a special agreement. That's a little outside of our department's area, but we can get that information for you, Michael, if you'd like more information on that.
Looks like Tina has a question. Can you please fully define the intended potential use of development reserve areas? So the background for the development reserve areas, we talked about the suitability analysis and just how some of these areas just weren't ready to be developed for various reasons or another. When we were creating Envision Franklin, we thought about, just giving everybody like a residential or single family design concept, but we didn't want to mislead anybody into thinking that some of these areas were ready to get annexed and to develop tomorrow. So we created the development reserve, which is the policy that's stated in Envision Franklin is 1 unit per 2 acres, which is even less than what the county zoning is for those properties, which is 1-to-1, they're MGA 1 unit per acre. So the development reserve areas were areas in the urban growth boundary that we just not ripe for development per se. The next question, how will this interlocal agreement affect the state annexation law? There's some interplay between the urban growth boundary and annexation and the state laws surrounding it. I don't know exactly how to answer your question, but I'll tell you what I know, and then Emily can chime in and fill in the gaps. But, the urban growth boundary still does have an impact, and it sets the stage for how we plan in Franklin. We plan for areas in our urban growth boundary. And as far as I know, cities are not allowed to annex properties in other cities' urban growth boundaries. So Thompson Station can't annex property in our UGB, and we can't annex property in their UGB. So it does still have an effect in those ways. In terms of annexation law, when the law changed to basically either you have to have a referendum to annex or it's just property owner driven. Prior to that, the city could annex by ordinance. So the city could proactively annex properties, and that helped the city grow in a comprehensive, orderly, manageable way. We've just struggled with we call them satellite annexations that are, 1.5 miles from the current city limits that want to come into the city. And how do we serve them on sewer, which is, how we grow in Franklin, and it's a tough question. Emily, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, this update to the urban growth boundary is separate of any action that the state would take regarding annexation law. So I don't think that this will necessarily affect state annexation law as a whole. If there are interlocal agreements that come out of this planning process with the county growth plan, they can't supersede the state law. We can try to come to agreements within our own county that work for each other, but that doesn't change the fact that annexation is still property owner driven. Now, I know that there are, different officials in the county that agree that this is a struggle for a lot of municipalities in terms of being able to grow at all. But at this point, the state legislature has not seemingly made any efforts to change that state law since 2015. So I don't know if we can predict the future on that, but that's what I can tell you right now.
The next question is from Randy. And Randy, I remember you from a few years back. Hello, will you be incorporating feedback from prior public studies such as the Mays Creek Basin study done a few years ago? Or will it be important for citizens to provide updated feedback at the appropriate time? In my opinion, I would say both. I think we're well aware of the Mays Creek study and the Smith property amendment and the outpouring of feedback that we received from that. And that was, I believe, in 2018. So that's pretty recent. I don't know that things have changed a whole lot in terms of, people's opinions on growth. But yeah, as things unfold, I would encourage you to stay informed and speak up with your neighborhood can speak up and you and others voice your opinions on what you think.
I agree, Andrew. I think since this is a separate process, staff and the elected officials that have been here through the Mays Creek Basin study are aware of the feedback that was received then. But it's important, I think, to continue to make comment and provide feedback during this process so that it gets documented again with this process as well. So I would encourage everyone to stay informed and make your feedback known as much as possible.
Great. Patrick Baggett has a question you may have mentioned, but who is representing the city on the coordinating committee?
So there's not a coordinating committee convened yet, but there is an advisory group that you can find out more about on the county's webpage, which is linked to our webpage. There's for the urban growth boundary. So we do have this advisory group that's working unofficially, not as a coordinating committee. And currently we have the mayor, John Schroer, Roger Lindsay, and Eric Stuckey that are in that advisory group. But this is really just a working task force that's kind of a sounding board for how we're going through the process as local municipalities at this point.
Alderman Berger, you can go ahead.
All right, sorry. Let me ask you something. Is there going to be, will this affect at all the ability, you were talking about clean lines between cities. And if you go up Mallory Lane at Crossroads Boulevard, it starts Brentwood and then it goes to Moore's Lane. When it goes over, then it stops back and starts back into Franklin. So there's a portion in there that's just sort of a donut hole cutout that is Brentwood. So will any of this be affected, or could it be affected, or could two of the cities have a discussion about cleaning up our city lines? Because, we like it to be, like you said, what city am I in? Am I in Brentwood? Am I in Franklin? And that area specifically is always confusing to people. And I serve, as appointed by the governor, I serve on the Local Government Planning Advisory Board. And we vote on, well, this will come before us. We'll vote on when Williamson County and all the cities change the UGB or update it. I will be voting on that, as it comes before our board. But funny thing was, just recently, they had Gallatin and Hendersonville did exactly that. They cleaned up some of their lines. And it came before us. We studied that. And we all voted to approve. And Gallatin and Hendersonville wanted to change some of that and clean up some of their lines. Will that be affected at all, or is that a possibility that there's any discussion between cities and cleaning up their lines? Or is this just the UGB?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible, but not really just through this process. Since the lines that touch in Cool Springs there, since the city limits actually touch each other, to clean up that boundary actually would require de-annexation by one municipality and annexation by the other once the other municipality has de-annexed it. So it's a lot more complicated than just revising the urban growth boundary line. At this point, changing the urban growth boundary line would not affect the actual city limits lines. So I don't know that that would change unless there's some interlocal agreement with an adjacent city to kind of clean up that line. So I think that's a discussion that would have to be had between various municipalities,
Right.
more
Yeah.
specifically about that. Eric, do you want to add?
Yeah, just to chime in, I think that's a really good response. It's not the primary purpose at all of this process. It doesn't mean that those kind of topics couldn't be identified and then worked out among cities. We've done a little bit of cleanup in the last couple of years with a couple kind of weird boundary issues with Brentwood already. And so obviously those are the kind of things that you could identify, but it's really around these growth boundaries and the broader discussion there. But one good thing is there's been a pretty healthy dialogue developed over the years among all the communities, the county and all the cities among one another. So that's the kind of thing that you could sort of branch off and potentially work on, but it's not, I wouldn't expect it to be a direct outcome of this. It could be a sort of a corollary to it, but it's not the primary purpose.
Yeah, I understood that it wasn't a focus of this, but I wanted to know if it would be able to be discussed or discussions towards achieving that, because it's exactly what Gallatin and Hendersonville did, annex, de-annex, and annex, and cleaned up their boundaries. Anyway, I just want to know if that was a possibility of discussion at any point, but don't want to muddy the waters. Thanks.
And Alderman Berger, I think it was instances like that, and that predates the urban growth boundary, but I think that was part of the reason the state put that into effect. So cities wouldn't be, racing to the fringes to grab land and compete for land, but to do it in a more orderly fashion.
I want to go back. We had a question from the Sadlers. Why does the city focus on external expansion and development? And what does this do for the city? So I think that's a pretty complicated question that we'll do our best to answer. With, long-range visioning and creating our long-range planning documents, what we've received from city officials as well as the public through community engagement has been that a thriving, growing city is important. It's important for the economic base. It's important for employment. It's important for the quality of life here in Franklin. But we aim to do it in a managed way that really focuses on strategic growth where it makes sense and how it can be done responsibly and efficiently. And in an orderly manner as best we can. And that's what's always come out of those visioning documents and kind of that process. So that's what I would say, is that it's really important from that aspect. And I don't know if Andrew or Eric want to kind of chime in on that as well, but that's just my initial thoughts about that.
I think we focus on external expansion and internal. In fact, I think we focus a great deal on internal expansion. But due to the growth of the area, I mean, the whole Middle Tennessee area, especially Williamson County, Franklin, there's just a lot of growth pressure, and we're trying to manage that and respond to it.
Yeah, I think that's true. There is focus on both aspects of what's going on internally. And I think you'll see in the next decade or decades to come that redevelopment is as much a discussion as development in a lot of areas. Just that's a natural evolution. But also, if you don't have a plan, you don't have a sense of how these pieces fit together and how they sync up with your ability to provide infrastructure, these pressures will come anyway, and it may happen in a way that doesn't fit your growth plans and your goals for your community. So I think that's why that's a healthier approach. And somebody apparently wants to talk to me, so I'll have to mute for a second.
Go ahead. All right. Does anybody else have any questions? I don't think I missed any on the chat box, but Andrew and Eric Connor, let me know if I missed anything.
I think we covered all the questions.
Well, let's kind of wrap up here. I want to let you all know that Andrew and I are both accessible if you would like to reach out to us and have further discussions on any of this. And we hope to see you all at the September 21st community meeting here at City Hall. It'll likely be at 6 p.m., but we haven't set the time exactly yet. So please stay in the loop on that. Andrew and my email addresses are what you would probably expect them to be: andrew.orr@franklintn.gov or emily.wright@franklintn.gov. And you can also find our email and contact info on our city website as well. We appreciate you all being here tonight and look forward to continuing this discussion as we propose kind of a draft line at the next meeting, and look forward to seeing your input as we adjust that boundary throughout the process.
Thanks, everybody.